Back film. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to have Diana here to talk about ecology and organic farming at Snowen, her family's vineyard, Domaine Dujac and Trienne. If everyone can make sure, I'll say this over and over throughout it, but to turn off their video and turn off their microphone. There's a chat bar on the side. If you have any questions that come up, I'm going to do my best to interject them as we go so you can feel like you're in the conversation, but obviously we want to make sure that we kind of keep on the path that we've set up. So without further ado, from Louis Saint-Georges, Diana Snowen says.
Hi, thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope this email finds you well. I guess I shall talk about how the three domains came to have the common link. I grew up in Napa, and the Snowen property was purchased by my grandparents in 1955, and we sold grapes. And so it's not the same connection as when you have a winery and you grow up in that kind of context. I just would go up to what we call the ranch, and I would munch on Cabernet and climb trees. And I just loved nature and sunshine. And I went to UC Davis because I liked the campus. It felt like the right distance from home, and it felt very wholesome. And when I came back after my freshman year, my dad said, "Welcome home, get a job." And so I went to my best friend's father and called Tim Mondavi and asked if he had a summer job for me. And I started working at Mondavi in 1997 as a sugar sampler. So you go out to all of the vineyards that Mondavi owns all over the Napa Valley and beyond, and you take a representative berry sample from each vineyard and bring it back to the lab, and they will measure the sugar and acidity, and it helps them determine their picking order with the hundreds and hundreds of acres that they gather fruit from. So I loved it. I just, again, the sunshine, and I love science and eating fruit and being outside. And so I went back to UC Davis, declared my major, and the next year I went again for the summer to Robert Mondavi Winery, and Jeremy Seyesses was there as an intern at the same time. So Jeremy's family owns Domaine Dujac. We eventually ended up getting married. I finished UC Davis, moved to France, and did a harvest in Bordeaux, and then started working in Burgundy with the 2002 vintage. And so today I work with his family as an enologist and really production oriented, and I commute back to California and make wine for my family. But I would say that that Burgundy is really the inspiration for all three domains. So Jacques, to loop in Trienne, Jacques started Trienne in the 90s, 1990, with Aubert de Vilaine and a third partner who is not in the wine business, but that's where the tree from Trienne comes. And so I do a little consulting with them for the reds, but mainly there's a team that handles the day-to-day winemaking, and we all go down. Jeremy, my husband, and his brother Alec and I go down from time to time to work on whatever's happening, purchasing fruit, blends, running the business. So Domaine Dujac is really the guiding light for all properties. When I moved to Burgundy, it just felt so right. Everything that Burgundians use in order to highlight the specialness of a site just felt so right. And I think the whole wine world has really been using Burgundy as a beacon for improving quality and making wines that are exciting with heart and soul. And so the most important thing, you're trying to make a vin de terroir, a wine that tastes like where it comes from. And Burgundians sort of figure this out intuitively because there are now all kinds of studies that prove what people could really feel to be true. The first thing you have to do is give up chemicals. So organic farming is important for quality, and that's probably the direction that we approached it from. And now we know also for in terms of health of our employees, health of the community, and the ecosystems, that it is so important not to use herbicide or fungicide. But really, we came to it from a quality standpoint, and the reason is because in the soil, you have a diverse microflora landscape, and the vineyards and all plants depend on these microbes in the soil to break down nutrients to make them available to the root system, and in exchange, the plant actually feeds the microorganisms around the roots sugar. So there's a symbiotic relationship. And when you're putting on herbicides, when you're putting on systemic fungicides, you're killing all of that microflora. And anyone can see it. I mean, without studies, you could, without scientific studies, anyone can tell the difference from a soil that has a lot of organic material and healthy microorganisms to one that's been treated with chemicals. I mean, it just looks like cement and it looks dead. So that was the first, the very first thing that when I started commuting back to California to make wine for my family, there were a lot of goals that I had in mind for improvement. And of course, organics was at the top of the list. So it took a while to get there. Like I said, from the beginning, my family had been selling fruit for a long time. And when you are farming for tonnage, it's a different perspective than when you're farming for wine quality. And, I have compassion for people who choose not to farm organically, because it is horrendously expensive, especially giving up herbicides. When we stopped using herbicides, so I started working for my family in 2005, and it took me until 2012 to convince the family to try to work without Roundup. And instead of making one $800 application to our 25 acres, it cost us $32,000 to remove weeds that year. And we didn't increase our prices, and it hurt. It really hurt. But and then I jumped on my plane, went back to France, like, good job, guys. But even my father and uncle, who had really been putting up quite a fight, and I understand our business was, kind of barely profitable, they are now completely on board. And since then, all of these studies have come out confirming, that it really is the devil, herbicides. But just looking at the soils, it is so different than it was 10 years ago. And you don't have to be a farmer to see the difference. So they're now completely on board. We gave up fungicides, so systemic fungicides. We gave up those in 2014. And the only thing that has been the hiccup for certification is that on our side of the property, so our side of the valley, which is the east side of Napa Valley, it's a lot of volcanic soils, and they are very poor in phosphorus. And finding an organic source of phosphorus has been tricky. And everybody on our side of the valley kind of butts up against this problem. So we've been doing trials now for 3 years, and I have really high hopes that the bone meal that we have dug in under each plant is going to be the key to find an organic source of phosphorus, so we can certify it. But as far as
can you go? What is the bone meal that you're putting out?
It's not vegan. I kind of hesitate. But I mean, the other things we've tried were fish oil, and bone meal is just, left over from meat processing, ground up beef bones, and you dig them in, and they are rich in phosphorus.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's not very appetizing. But yeah, the fish oil is worse, and our foreman really, really complained about it, and so did his wife. Because it's just smelly. Yeah, yeah. No, and even the people who really stand to be impacted by using herbicides are not those who are drinking the wine. It's the ones who are applying the product. So it's our foreman who would have been directly, hurt by continuing to use herbicides. And and vineyards go right up to the edge of of cities. And so that, it's also the communities. We have schools, and just the whole community, which will be impacted by whatever you're spraying in the vineyard. So I think, yeah, it's the right thing to do on so many levels. It's the right thing to do for the soil, for quality, and for your community. And when we really examine terroir, the word that really gets people is fighting with each other. The terroir is three components. It's the site, it's the weather in a given year, and it's people. And you can make that people sphere broader and broader and broader. So it's, yes, of course, the choices you make as a farmer and as an owner of your vineyard, but it's also on a vibrational level, that what you're bringing into the community, and and all the way to how prosperous is the government that is running the show in a big way. I mean, you look at like Tokai, it used to be the absolute pinnacle of fine wine, and because of communism and war, they really are rebuilding, just as an example. So terroir, you can really expand it to encompass people in a very large sense, because your ability to produce wine is going to be impacted by the human constructs on every level. So anyway, so back to things and inspiration I took from Burgundy. Another thing, beyond organics, is also this idea that that Grand Crus in Burgundy are 2% of the surface area. And when I came back to my family's property, I had these Burgundy starry eyes, and we have different altitudes and different expositions of all of our vineyards, and I wanted to do a single vineyard designate. So I now have a balance at this stage. It took me a while to get there. Also, I did 2 blends for a long time, and then starting with the 2013 vintage, I had single vineyard designates, the Brothers and the Ricos, and then the Ranch as a blend. And that's another kind of war of aesthetics in the wine world. What is best? And if you're going to really make a hierarchy, blended wines or unblended wines, and there's no answer. Everything is a matter of taste. But all I can say is that to this, I have been brainwashed or formatted to such an extent that really I find the most exciting wines to be 100% variety. So our top wine is the Brothers and the Ricos, and watching those vineyards show different sides of themselves every year is just very exciting for me. And then the Ranch is a blend, which we're showcasing today, the 2016, which just for me is a kind of iconic quintessential Napa Cabernet. And I really feel that every year since we've given up chemicals, the wines that are coming off the property are just getting more and more exciting. And you can feel the life force in the soils and the wines. So I'm very proud of that.
Can you talk a little bit about, obviously it's not something, the Ricos is a really small production that you guys do through pretty much all through your mailing list. So if you can talk a little bit about that vineyard, and specifically, and sort of the differences between that and Brothers, because obviously we, my side know the Brothers, love the Brothers, but the opportunity to try some of the other wines that I've gotten to try, the Cabernet Franc, the Merlot, the things that there's smaller production, that you can only get from the mailing list. I've seen reviews of Ricos, but I'm excited to learn a little bit more from you about what makes that terroir special.
Yeah, I wish I had more. So Ricos is a 1-acre vineyard, and it's on the lowest side of our property. Essentially, our property, on one property line, we have the Rutherford AVA, and on the other, we have the St. Helena. We're not in either. We're right above both of them. So the Ricos is right smack up against the St. Helena AVA, and it's east facing, which is a neat trick on our side of the valley. And yes, right, because we have a little ravine. So it's getting morning sunshine. And the Brothers is at 850 feet on the very top of the property, and it's actually on the top of the hill. So it's getting, the part that I take out for our Brothers blend. Like I said, you really have to be ruthless with your selection if you're going to do a single vineyard designate, I think. And so you have to really take the best. So I'm taking the very top of the hill. The rest, we have 10 acres. I'm just taking 1.6 acres out of the whole property, and that makes my Brothers wine. And it's getting sunshine from all sides, and it's getting a lot of all day long sunshine, whereas the Ricos only gets morning sunshine. And then it's higher up, and so you're going to have you'll have cooler days, warmer nights as compared to Rico. But then on the flip side, you're getting so much sunshine. So it has, it has more tannin, and Ricos is much more feminine. And it's a pity we don't have more Ricos, because the side by side is just so fun.
Well, it's a good reason for people to join the mailing list to get it.
Yeah.
But cool. So jumping sort of back into going back to Burgundy, I know you were saying that all of these things had been happening for so long in terms of organic farming. I know we've discovered over time, whether it be doing things like bone meal that helps phosphorus, or planting beans in between rows. What were what allowed Burgundy to be able to work organically? Were there what is the best way to put it? It's like, do you feel that because it's worked for so long, that there isn't the need to bring things that are outside of Burgundy into Burgundy to build up the soil, to improve the matter, that you can do it all with what's indigenous in Burgundy? Does that make sense?
Well, we do use compost from time to time. So we'll bring in organic matter. And, 200 years ago, most of these businesses would be a farm, or not even a business, would be a farm, and you would have both cattle and vineyards, and the manure from the cattle would go into the vineyards. And just a side note, it was usually the women who did the wheelbarrowing of the shit into the vineyards. I don't know why, but this is what I've been told. So, there is going to be some amendments made from time to time. We do from time to time. We didn't for a long time. For a while, when you go from conventional farming over to organics, you're kind of coasting on products that were added prior to your conversion. And we didn't, I guess we had about 15 years where we weren't adding anything. And recently we thought the vigor is now getting to be too low. And so we are adding some biodynamic composts to the soil to bring in organic matter. Then, because we're not using any herbicides, well, we are not no-till, and that's an interesting conversation, but I have no experience with it. And it's, I think, one of the exciting things that's happening in the wine world these days is the conversation around no-till and carbon sequestering by practicing no-till. Mm-hmm. We don't do that. We do mow in the weeds, and then of course they compost in the vineyard, and that brings what we call green manure to the vineyard. Yeah. So we, there are a lot of choices. I think that the most important choice from a quality standpoint is to not use those chemicals. And then it's a nuance of argument as to how often to plow, if at all. But I would like to do some trials with that. You have to, anytime you make a radical change like that in the vineyard, you have to give the vineyard a few years to adjust before you really know what the impact is on quality. Well, the first year is going to be, the first year when you convert to organics, your vine is going to be saying, "What? We were used to all of this chemical stuff, and we don't have the microbes in the soil built up yet, and you will have more mildew, and you will have an impact on your yields." same thing, everyone who I've spoken to who practices no-till, they say, ooh, do it little by little because you're going to have a huge impact on your yields in the short term. And in the long term, then the plants figure it out, refine their balance, and you get more normal yields again.
How dramatic, not to put a number on it, but like how dramatic was the change over when you, for something like Snowden, in terms of production, when you made all those changes?
Not as dramatic as the cost of removing weeds. And part of the reason it was so expensive was because we had just replanted the Brothers Vineyard. And so all of those vines are too small to they're like spindly, and you couldn't use a backhoe. It would have taken out the vineyard. So we were hand hoeing. And now the cost is more like $16,000 a year. But I don't think, there's not a lot of mildew pressure in California as compared to France. I mean, when you give up those systemic fungicides, if you miss the window on your organic fungicide, because the difference is a systemic fungicide, it's like an immunization. It's in the plant, and as it grows, all the new leaves are protected, and when it rains, it's still in there. It doesn't get washed off. The downside is, that symbiotic relationship. As the plant exudes sugar in the roots, it's also exuding fungicide, killing all of those single-celled funguses. So, but on the flip side, if you're going to do organic sprays, they are just a surface protectant, and when it rains, they get washed off. And when the vine grows, well, then all the new growth is unprotected. So you have to be very good at timing your sprays. I mean, some people just say, okay, I'm going to go I'm going to practice security, but of course we're all trying to use as little chemical as possible. We're trying to make as few passes as possible to not compact the soils. And if you're really doing a good job, you're looking at weather reports and mold models and timing your spray so that you can do as few as possible. But if you miss a window, then you can really lose a lot of fruit. Yeah.
What is in the organic fungicide generally?
Well, so, sulfur and copper for France, and the US just sulfur. And there's a lot of experimentation with alternatives. And I was actually last night at dinner with someone who uses milk instead of sulfur. So they just use milk and copper. We tried using whey at one point, and our foreman was not convinced. It's hard to do these trials during a growing season, especially in Burgundy, where we're at 42 latitude, and during the growing season it goes so fast, and you're just kind of galloping to keep up with it. And to add on top of that some kind of trial where you're going to do a special spray for just 3 rows here, it adds a huge amount of work to an already long day. But it would be wonderful to, if milk worked, it would, instead of sulfur, it'd be so much more comfortable for everybody who works in it, because these things are irritants. Sulfur, I don't need to tell you, sulfur is an irritant. And so when you walk in the vineyards and it's in there, your eyes itch, your nose itch. It's not that pleasant. Yeah. So there are alternatives. There are oils. Stylet oil is used a lot in the US. We don't use it here in France. I think it's not authorized for organic farming in Europe. Yeah. We could talk about the wines. I have the Trienne Rosé here. The 19. So Trienne, everything that is estate is organic, and that is something that's, we are working on tight margins. Our prices are low, our bit is small, and so we feel very proud of being able to do estate wines organically. Trienne, of course, is a portion of our own fruit, and a portion of it is organic, but a portion is not, and the rosé. But we are trying to get to the place where we can do an organic rosé also. But so we have our own estate fruit, and then also the previous vineyard manager, who's now retired to his own family's property. He sells us almost all of the fruit from their estate, and it's all organic. And so I don't know the exact proportion, but it's a high proportion of the fruit in the rosé is organic. Trienne also is in the same vein as what we're trying to do in Burgundy. And so, yeah, organics is something that we were determined to support, even though the margins are tough. And the other thing that we have been really investing in is room in the winery to buy the fruit for our rosé as fruit rather than as wine. And so that we've been doing, I think, since the 2015 vintage, and there's a real jump up in quality from the 2015. So here's the 19, and I have, do you have it?
I actually, amusingly, the bottle I was supposed to have, we drank all of last night. So I have it very fresh in my memory, but not my glass.
The empty bottle is very proof of deliciousness.
Yeah, no, I have a full one just for case. But yes, no, this was my first time tasting it last night. So
yeah, this is my first time as well. It's really explosive. It's delicious. Yeah, no, I did have it actually a month ago. It usually takes a little bit of time to kind of open up again, and this is just so aromatic and juicy and pamplemoussey, and the pamplemousse is grapefruit, and oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So this wine is really the bulk of what we make at Trienne. It's 90% of what we're in the heartland of Provence, and rosé is what Provence does best. And rosé everywhere else almost is kind of a byproduct, and certainly in California, it's a way of not losing whatever you've decided to bleed off your red tank. Whereas here we're trying to make rosé. And so you're picking it as you would pick a white wine, with acidity and freshness.
What is the, I can't believe I've actually never asked this question to you or anyone before, but what is where did the tradition of rosé in the south of France come from? Why does it make sense to make a rosé wine or make 90% of the wine rosé, beyond the fact that we all love it? But like, how did that?
Question. That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to it either. And I came in such like a red wine chauvinist. And I think Jacques did too, actually. When he started Trienne, he wanted to make a red blend like Trevelin. He wanted to make a Syrah Cab blend, and Cab is not an authorized grape in the area. So he was going to sort of be this revolutionary who was going to say, ha ha ha, AOC system, screw you. Here's my vin de table, and it's amazing. And yeah, we love the Saint Auguste, but the history did not play out that way. And it was really when Jeremy came back into Trienne, he said, we have to be making rosé. So it was kind of an afterthought for us, but certainly it is what you find mostly in the area. And I don't know the history. It's a very good question. I don't know. I mean,
Sorry to put you on the spot. No, I had never thought.
No, that's a good question. I don't know if it's because it's warm and it's easy to drink, and they just sort of accident. I really don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. Although obviously the rosé has been what most people know Trienne from, and obviously it's a huge part of the production. We were really fortunate to do, I think, 2 years ago in our national sales meeting at a vertical of Saint Auguste, from before you coming on through, and tasting 10 vintages. And I think it's
it's a great wine.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a great wine.
It is. It's really a serious wine. It's not. Yeah, there's not. It's so we're on all limestone, and limestone and clay, and mix of limestone and clay, and Syrah and Cabernet together are just magical. So sometimes there's some Merlot, sometimes one year there's some Grenache. Every year we play with the blends, but no matter what, there's always Syrah and Cab. It's a magical blend, and it's really a wine that ages. I mean, it's a true vin de terroir as well. And so, it's the kind of thing that tastes best in context. And so it's, when you're in the south of France with the thyme growing around your table and watching, the lavender and the sunset on the hills beside you, it feels perfect, with lamb and, but when you taste it out of context, it's quite tannic wine because we're high in altitude, and which is great for rosé and white. And for reds, it means you're going to have a lot of tannin and acidity. When you get those two together, you have to be careful with what you're serving it with. It's absolutely a food wine. It's not a wine that's going to dazzle anybody and, a blind against other wines without food. But yeah, with in the proper, olives and lamb and goat cheese and a warm summer night. I mean, it's amazing. It's a really great wine. Yeah.
And the Viognier, was that a choice to plant there, or was that originally planted in the vineyards when?
No, yeah, and that was us. And yeah, the Viognier is kind of an anomaly. It's the Viognier for people who don't like Viognier. Which is to say, I mean, you have the beautiful classic aromas, but a different texture than Contreau. It's much lighter footed and clean. I mean, and crisp. Again, because of that altitude.
Yeah, it's I think when I was a sommelier, that was the wine I bought the most. More than the rosé, because it was a time, although it's a different time now, where Viognier was a regular item you'd find by the glass, and it was kind of like, I want to find something that A, had value, but B, I actually wanted to drink. And every vintage, it was consistently outshone anyone else, and allowed the anything but Chardonnay people to have something big and fruity and rich, without the oak.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and especially with kind of what we've talked about in the past with Snowen, and as it relates to Domaine Dujac, but like that it's this showing of vineyard and place, and even something like the rosé is showing itself in 19 differently than 18, where, considering the amount of production, it could be sort of that idea that you're making a blend, you're making your non-vintage cuvee that needs to taste the same every year. I think it's really exciting when something that can be made as so simply asks you something each year. It's like, oh, I'm excited about Trienne 2019 as opposed to it's just Trienne Rosé. I think, and it's something we talked about, especially with like the Ranch being a wine that is so like you expect it in Burgundy, but you don't expect Napa Cab to taste differently every year.
Yeah. That was important to me. I mean, that's what makes wine interesting. And I would say if you're tasting my wines next to other Napa valleys, there's more variability, of course, and then we have to, of course, talk about the alcohols. I really formed my palate here in Europe, and I remember people would come through Domaine Dujac and they would gift us some of the cult classics that I won't name, but we wouldn't otherwise have paid for. And I was really excited. And we were going to taste these wines and see the best of the best from Napa Valley. And when you're tasting them and you're used to having European wines, my God, I was just so disappointed. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make wine that that is a little more restrained. And so definitely vintage characteristics were something I wanted to try and conserve, and then also make wines that are just more elegant and less in your face and easier to digest, and you feel a little better the next day without all that alcohol and sometimes sugar. But yeah, when you're respecting the vintage, you have to, there's a lot of things you have to think about. One thing in California, which is sort of the great homogenizer, is irrigation. And we try to do very little but we've never done none, but we have extremely porous soils anyway. So I don't know how much water is actually being effective for the plant anyway. And then beyond that, it's just, 2011 is a good example. 2017 is a good example. 2011 was very cool and wet. And, Napa Valley was freaking out about it because we were not getting our classic jammy, ripe 15% alcohol. And there's a lot of people who are using must concentrators, or a lot of people who were chaptalizing. And I had, 13.5, 14 natural alcohol. And I decided, you know what, I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to try to make this vintage something it isn't. And I'm not going to beat it up, which is another thing people do with Cabernet a lot in Napa. They want to extract as much as possible. And so I just decided, as I always do, to let come out what was going to come out naturally. And the 11s were beautiful. I mean, they were not classic. They're not what people are used to or expect from California, but they were beautiful. 17 is another outlier. 17 will always be remembered because of the fires. But for me, what really made 17 what it is was that heat wave over Labor Day weekend, where we got up to 120 degrees in the canopy 5 days in a row. And that is something we have never known. I have never known in Napa. I grew up in Napa, and it would get hot, but never that hot. So I dropped everything in Burgundy. Usually I try to do as much of the Dujac harvest as I can before flying over. I dropped everything, went over to see, what the results were and what needed to be done. And so we brought in the vineyards that were close to being ripe. They came in immediately. And then the ones that were not that close, I waited about 3 weeks or so. And, I was sampling every 3 days, and the sugars were not moving. I just I had never seen that. The canopy looked beautiful. The fruit looked beautiful. The sugars were not moving. The acids were disappearing. Flavors were developing, but the sugars were flatlined. And I went digging back into my UC Davis notes and saw that in extreme heat conditions, the vineyard will send out hormonal signals to finish ripening. So they'll lignify the seeds and lignify the peduncle, the stem that connects the cluster to the vine. Mm-hmm. And once that is woody, sugar cannot physically cannot get through into the cluster anymore. And so once I figured out that the sugars just weren't going to change, I got a little bit a little bit of higher sugar because of evaporation. But it was obvious that there was no more sugar accumulation, and the flavors were where I wanted. And I really believe it's important to pick living grapes and not raisins. And at least that's what I'm shooting for as an aesthetic. I think that I want living grapes because you can feel that vibration in the wine. So I just called it. I was like, okay, again, 14% alcohol is plenty. And I picked it and had everything in tank well before the fires, whereas most people were waiting for their classic 15 and a half, 16 when the fires came through. So there's a lot of loss of Cabernet and Zinfandel in 2017. So I had everything in when the fires came through, and just the Brothers Vineyard was not pressed off. And I had scheduled pressing for the first day of the fires. Our facility lost its electricity, and the Brothers ended up on its skins for an extra 2 weeks. The guys were going in and doing pump overs by gravity, so they were just taking wine in a pitcher and sprinkling it over the top of the tank. And the Brothers 17 had terrifying tannins at first, and for the first 6 months, I'd say. And then a year later, I loved it. And since 2017, I've been doing extended macerations on the Brothers, which is not something I had ever done before, just because I decided that it could. So yeah, 2017 is going to be another outlier, and it was a vintage that I decided to embrace and not fight.
Yeah, we were. It's funny actually, when we were just in Burgundy, it was something that it seemed Pascal was talking about that with 2019 in Burgundy, that the sugars never, like even as hot as it was, that his sugars that he was taking they hit a point and they never increased. So you could actually let it fully ripen, as opposed to picking it early and picking unripe. which
Yeah, 19 was tough in Burgundy. It was just, it was impossible choices. When making a harvest decision is really stressful because a lot is riding on it. And, ideally in a perfect year, you're going to get everything you want, flavor, the right level of alcohol or sugar and acidity all at the same time. But usually you're going to have to make concessions and pick and choose. And 19 was tough. 19, it was hard to get you couldn't have it all. So you had to make choices.
I'm gonna
we also had 17 here. Sorry.
Since I'm gonna grab another glass to pour myself a little bit of the 16 Snowen, so we can talk a little bit about, or actually no, let's talk about the Dujac Blanc before we get into the red.
All right, yeah. I don't have another glass. I just do this. Yes, so Morey white is unusual. We have so this is the Morey village is between the winery and the main road. And we have against the main road, the slope goes down and then the road goes back up again. And so you have this pocket where cold air accumulates when you have a frost event, that area just kept getting nailed consistently. And Chardonnay has vegetative growth a little bit later than Pinot Noir. So after getting frosted repeatedly, Jacques decided to plant to Chardonnay instead. And so it was a practical choice. But this wine it's delicious. I opened it myself. I haven't had it since bottling, I think, or I don't know, maybe a tasting, but it's been a while. I did not have it in my mind, and I opened it with Jeremy. I was like, "Ooh, go team! This is yummy." So Morey, white from my first vintage when I went to Burgundy was at Le Fleuve in Pouligny with Anne Claude, and at the time I was 22, I can't remember. I was young, and I brought some Morey Blanc over to try with the team in Pouligny, and they said, "Oh yeah, this smells like red soil," and I didn't get it, but now I do. Essentially, it's really quite mineral. So when you try it next to a Pouligny, which there's minerality, but it's more floral, and this is kind of a more weighty minerality. Compared to the Côte de Beaune. And so both the Morey Blanc and the Montluisan are unusual in that they're white wines from the Côte de Nuits, and it's kind of fun to blind taste our colleagues on them from time to time and get their impressions.
Well, it's interesting also placement, because you're talking about one being close to the road, and then Montluisan is at a much higher elevation.
Montluisan is above the Clos La Roche, and it's on a very steep part of the hill. There's almost no surface soil, and so it makes for a wine with a lot of tension because you're right. You really have minerality there. It tastes like you're licking seashells, and because you're high up, and because of the aspect, the sun, you get shaded earlier in the day. You're a little bit higher altitude. We have pHs sometimes which don't even reach 3. So that's like champagne numbers. I mean, it makes for a very exciting wine. And of course, that was planted by Ponceau de Aligoté. He made the Montluisan famous for white wine first, and then when Jacques acquired this vineyard, it was planted to Pinot Noir, and it made for kind of shrill red wines, and he planted it to Chardonnay, not Aligoté.
That's funny to think, because you're saying it's right above Clos de la Roche, and you have obviously your most famous Grand Cru for Domaine Dujac, and then just being above that, you're making wines that are shrill as opposed to majestic, glorious.
Yeah, it turns on very little. I mean, the difference in kind of geographical location is tiny, and then you can have worlds of difference in terms of style. Worlds, I mean, it's all nuances. Also, Burgundy. It's the best way to understand it is to walk around And I kind of understood finally the difference between Clos la Roche and Clos Saint-Denis and why they were the way they were when I would go for runs. And Clos Saint-Denis comes right out, the combe, the funnel that comes down from the côte, brings cold air. And so it has a breeze and cold air coming through. Whereas at Clos la Roche, there's really not much air movement. And I think that's a large part of what explains these two vineyards, which are really right next to each other.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Will you talk a little bit?
Okay.
This is something that I've appreciated from the visits, and obviously everyone who's here knows Domaine Dujac because of red wines, but it's from obviously the working with the new parcels that you're working with, but both in Maurice Saint-Denis, Blanc Village, and the Mont-Louison, there's been a lot of steps and a lot of focus, it seems, to bring those to the level of the red wines, even if they're lesser known, that has happened over the years. So can you talk a little bit about
yeah. And we also, we recently got this 2 hectare in Pouligny, which really made us want to raise our white game. And you know, Burgundy has really gone through the ringer on this problem of Primox, and we wanted to avoid that at all costs. So essentially, at this stage, you know, taking a step back and looking at what happened with Primox, we have all collectively deduced that when presses became very gentle, there was something about that made the wines actually, ironically, more vulnerable. And so we think that, you know, you were pressing so gently that you weren't getting any of the tannins that actually act as antioxidants. So with the whites now, and it's been a long time, even before we had the Pouligny, we crushed them. And before we had the Pouligny, we were crushing them by feet. Now that we have 2 hectare of Pouligny, we have an actual crusher that we use as we fill up the tank. And so when you crush it, you're breaking the skins, you're liberating the seeds, you're getting more tannin. And I think that little bit of tannin, that's kind of one of those fine lines of riding between, you know, the perfect and the slightly imperfect that make a wine interesting. And I do think that's, you know, that's part of making a vin de terroir is, you know, a million different times just letting nature, giving nature a little room, so that you're not making something that, you know, I was taught to do at UC Davis, to make something that's technically different, but you're giving room to nature to do what it will and kind of following along. And that's when you get exciting wine. But you can't make so much that you can't follow each wine, because it can go sideways. So it's really something you can only do on a certain scale. And so crushing, we crush it, and then we don't sulfur for the first 24 or even more hours. And so you're first of all, you're getting more of these phenolic compounds, then you're letting it hyperoxidize. And so what happens then is everything the pool of things that could be oxidized, they come together and they form chains that are so large that they fall out as tannins. And so that whole pool of molecules is kind of out of the wine forever. So the wine turns quite brown. It's kind of alarming. But then the solids fall out. And then at that point, we will rack and sulfur and put it in barrel and wait for a native yeast fermentation to happen. Then from that point, you know, making white wines, it's actually tough. You know, from a red wine perspective, I always thought, you press it and stick it in barrel. How easy is that? But it's tough. It's subtle. It's kind of, at that point, you need to watch temperatures, and you need to watch your fermentations, and you need to watch how full your barrel is, essentially, and just make sure that you're doing, you know, having the right temperature, the right fullness of barrel at the right time. It sounds easy, but when you've got a bunch of them fermenting, it's a lot to keep track of. And yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my dog just was getting ready to bark at something. Likes to do that. But yeah, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, because obviously there's this sort of like, right now it's very hip to make very reductive Burgundy specifically. You know, that there's this move where people who are very good at it, like, you know, Hubert Lamy and Jean-Marc and obviously and Lafon, Lefebvre, you have these like very reticent, reductive styles, and then you have people who are using, like Alex, who doesn't make it in a really reductive style. And what I've appreciated is, which I didn't even think about, was when Jeremy had said to us that he does both sort of oxidative and reductive to make the final product.
It's true. Yeah, you have to time those things right. So early on, we're going to hyperoxidize. And what I'm talking about the first 2 days before it's even started fermenting. Then from that point on, you really want to stay on the side of reductive. And our wines can become reductive. That's another one of those fine lines. A little bit is good, too much is not. And you want to keep an eye on that. Yeah, but essentially, it's like you can apply the same philosophy to all of these wines that we're drinking tonight, which is if you really want to make something exciting, you have to leave room, like I said, you have to leave room for nature's complexities, which sometimes involves some flaws. You have to be willing to go there. And a lot of people just aren't, because the stakes are high. It's terrifying. But that's the difference between making industrial wine and making artisanal wine, which is now, synonymous with uber premium wine.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, give a little space to nature.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the great thing about the whites in general. Obviously, there's outliers in the sense that the Mont-Louison has such intense acidity as the wine.
Yeah.
But like there is that for, what I like about certain wines is where you can, if you're someone who loves a reductive style, you can find that in this Maury Saint-Denis. But if you want something that's open and then you can find that in it as well. These every year, it becomes a conversation and that I have with people just to remind them that how high the quality is, and that this is definitely something to open up and get in people's glasses. So I was really excited that Knightsbridge suggested that we put this as the tasting.
Yeah. No, and it's it is one of those fun things to make someone try blind. Yeah.
But
jealous, you have the 16 ranch. I don't. I ship myself wine here, but I'm up to 15, and then I recently got my 17 to write my tasting notes, and my 18s to do my blends, but I don't have 16. 16 was just a beautiful vintage. We all like a little hang time. I like hang time. I'm trying not to make wines with high alcohols, but as long as the extra time on the vine just gives you more flavor and complexity. 2016 gave me everything I wanted on a silver platter. It was cool, it was gentle, and I got to wait a few extra weeks on the vine without having huge alcohol spikes. And the 16s, I also think what's at play there is that you can really start to feel the vibrancy in the soil, and you can just feel an extra dimension there, which I think is the years without chemicals that you can start to feel in the glass. Like I said, every year is just a little more intensely alive.
Yeah, I think to the point, what these wines are really like. I learned about wine from Italian wine, so not afraid of tannin and acid. In fact, truly love it.
I love tannin too. I love tannin too. Yeah, and actually, Sant'Auguste I think has more. If you're really again trying to apply your blind tasting skills, it has more in common with Italian wines than with other wines in Bordeaux because of our altitude. We have that acidity and tannin at play, and it's really savory,
Mediterranean kind of thing.
Yeah.
That ties together.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing with when we've talked about it with Snowen is that for both brothers and ranch is that there is a specific floral sense to the wines that comes through. I think we were talking about roses and purple flowers. It is always in the blind lineup we do every year. It's always got more acidity a little bit more pronounced tannin. It is a more structured style than the traditional, but it has that, even when the alcohols have gotten high, I know in 15, they were
Yeah.
definitely more pronounced than you let them be, and and they were
Yeah.
what they were.
Well, so yeah, the thing about what makes a Grand Cru, they always get a little riper. I mean, that's kind of part of it.
Mhm.
And my brother's vineyard, it's right on the top of that hill. It gets a lot of sunshine. We're in California. So, I said, I want to make a wine from California. And again, it's kind of compromises. So yeah, brothers can get up to 15, of course, it really can. I make 15 wines. I had a Petit Verdot a couple years ago, which I think was 16 and a half. It actually folded in quite nicely. You didn't even notice. And my native yeasts took it all the way to dryness. So I'm beyond numbers at this stage. I really want to make something that speaks of its site, and I want to keep the alcohols down. That's it's a high priority, but above all, I want to make something that tastes like where it comes from, and we're in California, so.
Yeah.
There are, you see 15% alcohol. Well, sometimes that's a watered back 15. So they would have picked it if they fermented dry, but we would have made it all the way to 18. I try to do is if 15 is a true 15 without a big fat water add.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, the dirty secrets I should not be.
In terms of so since you've just written the notes on the 17 ranch, what would you say in terms of flavor profile as a taster? Your tasting is different between 17 and 16.
So 16, they're quite different. 16 is so joyful. 17 is it's it tastes very classic. It's actually, I think, the closest thing I've ever come to making. And hi, now you have to come in.
Hi. Just bring my wife a glass of champagne.
Oh, nice.
Well, this is pretty delicious. I don't know if you want
Well,
to share it.
We might include it.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Good to see you, Jeremy.
Sorry.
No.
Where was I? 17 is it's if you're gonna taste it, it's probably the closest thing I've ever come to making something that tastes really quite Bordelais. I think it'll really trick up people blind. It's pretty austere. It tastes like a cool vintage, but it tastes really very serious. I love it. I like austerity, and I like a wine that you have to work for. I don't like it to just like spread its legs. Sorry. I really like something that's subtle. And 17 is so exciting, in that way. And it's mystery and austerity. It feels like a cool vintage, and yet ironically, there's this huge heat wave that really made it what it was. And it just, for me, is a vibrating proof that you don't know how resilient nature actually is. I left on my plane in 2017 thinking that climate change is going to make it impossible for us to make fine wine in Napa. And 17 in the bottle was proof to me that you never know. You have to keep an open mind. So I'm doing everything I can to make our businesses green and make our businesses carbon neutral. And I want to stop climate change as best as I can. But you can only do so much. And I think that there's an incredible resiliency in the vineyards, which gives me much hope. 17s give me hope.
One last question, and then I will let you get back to your champagne and your guests. Please tell everyone we all say hello.
I will see all of your initials.
But since we didn't talk about it, and since the focus was on organics, can you talk a little bit about? And I know this was part of the conversation that I watched you talk a couple weeks back, but organics versus biodynamics for you, and what are you? I mean, what are you taking from biodynamics, and what are the positives, and what makes you stay the course as organic focused?
So when you're biodynamic, you're already organic, so no chemicals. Then on top of that, you're doing the biodynamic sprays. And I should say that there are as many biodynamic interpretations as there are farmers. Everybody has their own recipe, and it's absolutely the choices you make are going to be in function with whatever you're being hit climactically and what you're growing and what you're trying to achieve, because they have, there are 8 different sprays, and our foreman will prepare a particular tea after a hail event, or in this year we were in hydric stress for a while, so he did another particular tea that was adapted to hydric stress. So it's the constants for biodynamics are the silica and the cow dung, which is shoved in the cow horn and buried at a particular place on your property over winter, and then biodynamized, which means you're stirring it at the proper, doing it in accordance with the calendar at the proper planetary alignment. You're going to biodynamize it in a copper receptacle. You're going to stir in one direction until a vortex is created, stir in the other direction until a vortex is created for 2 hours, then into the copper backpack, and you're applying it for Jujak, we're applying it by hand with the copper backpack. There are some people who are biodynamic and do it by tractor, but normally, and I think this is a really beautiful philosophy, normally you're supposed to do it by hand with a backpack, because the closer you are to your primary material, the better, the stronger the connection between you and the plant. And so there's a lot of focus on the ecosystem, both micro and macro. And so animals are frequently part of biodynamics. We have had at Trian sheep for weed management. In Burgundy, it's a little trickier because we have got 85 parcels for our 23 different wines, and you can't just let animals go into your neighbors' vineyards. But the idea is that there is an exchange between the animals, including us, and the plant. And the closer you are, the more you intensify that vibrancy of life that we all share. And at the very least, people who are skeptics of this idea, they say, no, the only reason you have an effect is because you're closer and you are seeing what needs to be done better. You have a more intimate connection, so you see what you need to do and how you need to treat your vineyards. Well, even that is great, a great observation. You are closer and you're interpreting the needs of your vineyards better because you are right next to them. And even if it's just that, I'll take it. But there's this intention element to biodynamics, which that part I can take to Snowen and it doesn't cost us anything. Sending people with copper backpacks up and down the vineyard rows is really expensive. And so I have not even suggested that to my family yet, because we really can't afford it. But I think in terms of preservation of ecology, the organics is excellent. Biodynamics is an extra layer, and you start getting into the esoteric. And we have at Jujak, we went straight to biodynamics from conventional without ever passing through organics. Yeah. And in the last 5 years, we were able to acquire a small parcel of Clos de Roche, and we divided it in half. And half we farmed the way we farm everything else biodynamically, and half we farmed organically to try and understand the difference. And essentially, it's subtle at this stage, and this parcel is a little bit hard to evaluate because there were a lot of missing vines, and so that's kind of impacting, and also the results in the bottle and in the vineyard. But it is our impression that, and we're biased, that the biodynamic wine has more acidity, and there is, again, this vibrancy. The organic is delicious. It's probably more hedonistic and kind of juicier. And the biodynamic consistently has measurable, more acidity measurably, and then this tension that the organic wine does not have. Wow. But in terms of sharing a planet and not polluting, you're achieving that with organics. Biodynamics is another step on top.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to close. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Wines are delicious. This was super, super informative. And thanks to everyone else for joining us. If you have not tasted any of these wines, make sure to do it. There's only a few places to get any more 16 Ranch. We're excitingly waiting the 17 to come in, and at least in the Midwest, the Trian Rosé just started just with us having warm weather. So super excited. Thank you so much for your time. This was really enlightening.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Take care, everyone.
Yeah. Have a good night. Thanks.
Cheers.